Hello and welcome back to the workshop. Today I'm fitting a set of Wittner geared pegs to this cello. It's come in with pegs being quite slippy and in some cases too tight, very difficult to turn. It is a young student and they're struggling to tune it. So the solution, or best solution, is a set of these Wittner geared pegs. So first up we have the pegs which are needed, the tools used to fit them. I have a reamer, a tapered reamer, which matches the taper of the pegs. These are a press fit. Some instruments have different tapers, so it's important to be able to correct the taper in the peg hole. I also have a saw, a file, and various different grades of sandpaper which I'll be using to trim the ends and finish them. First task in fitting these pegs is to remove the old strings. Just back each string off. This A peg is very tight. Down the bridge. Bring down the bridge like that so that it doesn't collapse and slam into the instrument. Whole piece comes off. And then I can take the strings out. If you're reusing your strings and you're unsure which string is which, some, especially for instance on a cello, the G and D strings can be a very similar size. Many strings are colour coded at either one end or the other with their silk windings. If you're not sure, maybe just take a photograph of the pattern, and that way you have that for when they go back on. First up, I'll walk you through the process of fitting the A peg. I'll remove all the old pegs, they're not necessary anymore. There are times when the holes that the pegs fit in can be quite dirty, they can have notches in them, they can be quite worn, so it's important to leave enough room in the sizing to be able to ream the hole and get to some fresh timber inside the peg box. That's started to clean up the hole. There are still some marks. The Wittner pegs for cello come in three sizes: small, medium and large. These are the mediums, which are measured as 14 millimeters, and that's measured from the point right up at the collar of the peg. So when you're measuring the pegs that you're taking out of your instrument, you can measure them at the collar, and as long as they're on the same taper, which they're not always, you want to get the next size larger than the taper, I would suggest. These are around 12.5, almost, some of them almost 13 millimeters. These small size Wittner pegs that you can get are 12.5 millimeters at their collar. However, I felt for this instance that it was just too close and didn't leave enough room for the pegs to fit. So straight out of the box, you don't cut the pegs down at all. They just press fit in once you have the hole of the correct size. So you can see these pegs are quite a bit too thick for to go straight into the holes. So if you don't have the correct tools to fit them, then you will be left with with a problem. So there is generally a fitting cost as well to think about when you're purchasing these pegs. You do need to be cautious as you're reaming the hole out. It can change very quickly. So it'll feel like you're not getting far, and then all of a sudden if you go too far, it will be too large. And that goes the same if you're a budding luthier and looking to learn these processes. Yes, the peg is just starting to fit here. These pegs have ridges on them, which when you press it into the peg box, these ridges stop each side of the centre from turning, so they remain fixed in the sides of the peg box. And when you turn the head of the peg, there is a set of planetary gears in the head of the peg which rotates this centre on a reduced gear ratio, and it means there's no friction in the peg box. But when you are fitting them, you need to allow a space for these grooves to press into the side walls of the tapered holes that we're cutting. So they will go into a certain point, and then there's a certain amount of tight press fit when they go into the peg box. So they'll get them to probably, I find, for a rough guide, once this portion of the peg at the inside collar of where the string is run is just coming through the peg handle side of the peg box wall, it will then press that next distance to bring those peg holes into the centre of the peg box. I'll show you as we go. You do need to make sure that you are reaming the holes in the correct direction. You certainly don't want to ream the C peg hole on a cello, for instance, from the wrong direction. You'll be left with quite a job to fix it. Peg is just starting to catch the point on the other side. If you do push the pegs in a little tight, a little firmly, and they're getting stuck in there, you need to make sure you're not pulling them out by the head of the peg. You can actually slide that off, and the gears inside then can become a problem if you pull on this too hard. So you need to then sort of tap them out from the other side, or push them out from the other side. That sometimes is just a piece of pegwood or a soundpost or something through here, and a little tap with a hammer or just a press with your fingers can just pop that peg out. You can see the peg is now fitting, and it is just starting to squash into place. That's pressing it out. So I've created a few notches, so when you're putting it in each time, once you have sort of created some notches from these grooves, you just want to rotate the peg gently when it goes in until those notches drop back into place, so you're not creating multiple notches around that fresh hole that you've just cut. And you can see how that sort of presses into place. So at the moment it still needs some more material removed out of it, but it's getting close. And from this point on, you want to be very cautious as to how much you remove. Just see if we can find the notches. There's the notches just there. We're just starting to press into place, but still want a little further than that. That's getting quite firm in there. I'll just give it a gentle tap with the hammer. There's the notch. Just starting to press in. So for this peg here, I actually would prefer to leave it at that point, even though we have the pegs, the strings are not in the centre. That's because the D peg goes in at the top here to have the collar the same distance from the peg hole, the peg box. So that one's going to be roughly 17 mil. So we want this one to be at about the same point so that the pegs look uniform. If this peg goes in too far, then this one will be sticking in and this one will look like it's hanging out. We won't be able to push this one in far enough. So that will dictate how far in we go. So once you're happy with where the peg is pressing into, which in this case is there's roughly a millimetre. Zoomed in here, there's roughly a millimetre of the collar coming through the inside wall of the peg box before we have the string area. So once you're happy with the position that the peg is at in the peg box, I'll just take a pencil and mark the outside end that we want to cut off. So I'd prefer to cut these taggy ends off. It does say on the Wittner's instructions that that's fine to do so, within a certain distance of the end of the string wind area. So within, for these pegs it said 4 mil. Within 4 millimeters of the end of this area, you can cut that off. So that's a fairly small area, and obviously if we're cutting it off back here, we've got plenty of room. You can get these pegs for all stringed instruments, cello, viola and violin, not bass obviously, they have machine heads, and down to at least 3/4 in most instruments, cello as well. I think you can get right down to 1/8 if you order them specifically. So now we have our position marked off. I'm going to cut that piece off and file and sand it back. This material can be quite messy after the cut, so I'll go through with files now and sandpaper to clean it up. So I'm using here a 120 grit sandpaper. Just chamfer off around the edge. Clean off some of the taggy bits of plasticky material. This is a piece of, I think this is 400 grit. And then I'll use a piece of 1200 grit wet and dry paper. Start to get rid of the scratch marks from the previous grits of sandpaper. This is a much more difficult process with this plastic material than it is with ebony, as I was saying. I'll jump to various grades of micro mesh to polish it up, get the end looking nice, shiny, and like the end of an ebony peg would. Hopefully get it as close to that as possible. It's just starting to shine up reasonably nicely. So you're happy with how the end is looking. We'll drop that back in the cello. Now that we've trimmed our peg to the size that we're happy with, we'll drop it back in, find those notches that were created previously. There they are there. And press the peg back in place. And if everything's been lined up correctly, the end of the peg will just be at the edge of the peg box here. And when we turn the handle of the peg, the outer collar on both ends will stay still. The inner portion where the string goes will turn. And the same goes for both ways. That's quite a smooth, nice smooth turn. It doesn't take, you don't need to hit the end of the peg with a hammer or anything like that, just press it in. You'll feel it sort of squash the wood fibres with those little grooves, and that will be in. And that's all there is to fitting those pegs. I'll go through now the process and fit the other three and come back to you when they're all in. Here's the final peg going into the instrument. Been through that same process with all four pegs. Little press in place, and there we have all four pegs. Now that we have our pegs fitted, it's time to string the instrument back up. You'll notice here we have 2 holes in each peg, one here and one closer to the edge of the peg box wall. Generally, if you're not going to cut your strings, the length of your strings back, you'll need to fit them into the hole that's farthest from the wall of the peg box, closest to the handle part of the peg. You want to wind the string from the hole back towards the handle of the peg. You're going to wind the handle of the peg so that the peg turns away from the body of the instrument, and you want to fit the string in the hole when it's at the top of the circumference of the peg. This is the larger hole here that's farthest from the handle of the peg, and the hole is at the top of the circumference of the peg. It's the hole that's closest to the scroll. The string into the hole just so it protrudes maybe half a centimetre out the other side, and then start winding the peg in the direction away from the body. I'll do the same thing where I wind the string to the outside and then cross it back over. With smaller instruments, violin, viola, you need to ensure that the string stays on the portion of the peg with these Wittner pegs that is turning. So there we have the A and C strings fitted, and I'll now go on and do the other two. But that's basically the demonstration of how Wittner geared pegs are installed on an instrument and how the strings go back onto these new pegs. See you back in the workshop again soon.